Hello and welcome to Building Tomorrow's Insurer, the podcast where we dive into people, platforms and the ideas reshaping insurance from the ground up. I'm your host, Nigel Fellowes-Freeman, the founder and CEO of Kanopi, and today I'm joined by someone who I would say has been at the sharp edge of insurance regulation and litigation. Doesn't look like it, but for more than a decade. Kezia David, she's an award-winning litigator. Now, I want to go and dive in what award-winning litigator means, and we're going to jump into that a little bit, and regulatory specialist. So she's been focused very much on like ASIC crackdowns, like accountability standards, really had, you could call it maybe a front row seat to some of the forces reshaping the industry. And so I'm really, really excited for this conversation. It's not often you get to sit down with, someone who has been there and seen a lot. And so, look, Kezia, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really, really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm equally looking forward to this. There's a lot of things to explore in this space, and I'm always happy to discuss some of the highlights and perhaps not so highlights in the developments in recent times. Yeah,
share some of the knowledge. Look, and I think it's always nice to start at the beginning, and often people fall into insurance, but like also kind of from a legal standpoint, I'd love to hear just a little bit about your story. How did you kind of find your way to where you are now?
Sure. Well, you're right on the money when you say people tend to fall into insurance, and I hate to be a bore, but I am no exception to that. And it's hardly surprising. The insurance market holds such a vast space in all aspects of commercial and personal life, so it's only a matter of time before you connect to it in some way, shape, or form. For me, just looking at it through the legal lens, my focus has always been in the context of dispute resolution, and given the wide range of impact that decisions that insurers make can have, it was a rather obvious choice for me to practice in the area. And as you say, there's been a lot of excitement, a lot of focus in this area, and a lot of change. And so for someone like me who does typically tend to work with the players in the financial sector, it is a place of privilege because you do work with them to provide solutions that ultimately enhance their engagement with their end customer. And that for me is personally rewarding. So that's why I am doing what I'm doing.
Super interesting. Can you maybe, if you were to think about maybe some of the largest shifts in regulation, maybe over the last 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
Can you maybe talk to what are the top 2 or 3 in your mind that have really, you kind of feel that you've been part of and seen really impact the space?
Sure. The interesting thing about regulation and recent regulatory change is that at its heart, the messaging is the same. And what you've seen in recent times is, I suppose, an attempt to provide some clarity around what the purpose of the insurance market is supposed to be, what the expectations on the insurance market is, which is ultimately to deliver for customers in a way that matters and in a way that is fair and just. And so that's where the regulatory change has occurred. And so if you were looking at regulatory change, it's really focusing in on the development of market trust in the insurers. And the practical consequence of that is that every interaction in one way, shape, or form that an insurer has with its end customer is now going to be subject to scrutiny. It is hardly surprising that insurers are seen to wield significant power, and as a result, there is an extra level of guidance that is being provided to ensure that that power is being used well. Practically, what that means is from the time that an insurer writes up its policy to how it goes about selling its policy to even some of the mundane notices that get issued all the way up to the claims and the claims processing and the outcomes, every aspect of that can be subject to scrutiny in recent times and because of recent legislation. And here, what the regulators are really looking for they want to see good practices entrenched in the insurance market. And so they're looking out for the outliers, the examples of the outliers, and that tends to come up in the context of, say, a complaint made against an insurer. But I would dare say that when a regulator is looking at that complaint, they're not simply looking at that one complaint and that one issue. They're looking to see if that issue has bled into a class of similar claims or a class of similar products. And given the scale of the insurer's operations, it's no surprise to anyone that we have systems in place in order to deliver the vast deliverables that we do deliver on. And so the challenge then is, by the time you identify one issue, your system has clicked over 1,000 times over, and that one issue multiplies. And the practical challenge for insurers in this, I suppose, space now, with all the different changes, is what mechanisms now do we have in place to ensure ongoing monitoring of compliance? And if there's an issue that's been flagged, how do we deal with that swiftly and promptly?
Yeah. And how does the Australian market compare? Like if you were to look overseas and, I don't know, similar markets, maybe UK or Canada, maybe the US is a little bit different, but how does the market here compare to globally from a regulatory standpoint?
It seems that the Australian market is more vocal with its insurers, and and that's been taken up in a public sense as well because of the public inquiries and such. So it has certainly had a lot of attention brought to, I suppose, expectations not being met by the insurance sector, and there has been a lot of drive to bringing accountability and visibility and transparency around what's been happening. So certainly I do think that because of recent developments that our market is holding the insurers to higher account, and that certainly has its challenges, but you can see the benefits there too, because innovation is driven through some of these recent developments and challenges, and certainly there's a lot of learning to be gained from what's happened.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? Because when you understand how important it is that the frameworks exist, that insurers are held to account. And it's always such a fine balance to make sure that stays in place, but you still keep the doors of innovation open, like the ability for companies to work within those frameworks and actually do new things that are meant to be better for the customer in terms of maybe an interaction or a new style of delivery or a new product, all of those kinds of things. And just I think that's the desire, isn't it? We're trying to have some clarity that you can work within the guidelines that exist, but still innovation can occur.
Exactly, absolutely. And with innovation, it's not even a question of can we opt in for innovation or can we opt out. Given the pressures you're under, you need to opt in, otherwise you risk being left behind or losing market share. And so the question for insurers that they have to grapple with is, how do we opt in a way that is relatively risk averse or appropriately risk averse is the question. And the how piece is clearly going to be different from insurer to insurer, but there are certainly some foundational building blocks, at least from a compliance perspective, that I can see should be at least to some degree uniformly adopted if an insurer is deliberating on potential innovation in one or more of its spaces that or insurance products. So certainly there's room for innovation, but you do want to have some underlying, I suppose, risk-averse metrics in place to help you innovate in a manner that doesn't destabilize your deliverables.
Interesting. And what are those blocks? If you're going to go super deep, but like what are those kind of pillars look like? So
for me, from an innovation perspective, I would split that into two phases. Phase one is the exploratory stage where you're looking at what do you want to adopt, what does it look like, and that sort of thing. And phase two is the implementation phase where you're really tailoring things and getting personnel involved and such. In phase one, for me, there are four critical layers of I suppose, considerations that should be firmly in place. The first layer is understanding what compliance metric each of your departments within the insurer is delivering on in the present time, and being very clear about that in your consideration. The second layer is what impact does the compliance metric of one team have on the other, and knowing that ecosystem that already exists within your company, and then layering it further with what information feedback loops exist within a team or within your departments that enhance or otherwise assist the ongoing compliance that your company is delivering on. And ultimately, finally layering it with, well, whatever innovation strategy is being adopted, how does it protect these ecosystems, or better yet, enhance these ecosystems to deliver more efficiently, perhaps, the things they're delivering on. And you can see that if you don't have an innate and a robust understanding of that, you could inadvertently put something in that seems like a good idea, but because these metrics are not being properly formulated and properly being analyzed, how you can inadvertently break something that is working in some space. So that will be in the phase one. But the final phase of particularly the implementation, you do really want to pick up the learnings that you've learned from recent ASIC prosecutions, where it is perfectly okay for you to tailor innovation to support the systems that you have in place, but it certainly needs to ensure that effective training of the personnel that are engaging with it are in place in a manner that is consistent across the timeframes. And ultimately, you do want to continue to monitor that this beautiful collaboration of innovation and personal training is ultimately delivering on the things that you want them to deliver on, and have a system that has that checks and balances, and if it's not working, that you can deal with that promptly and effect a solution promptly.
And do you think from an insurer standpoint, their roles have evolved? If you think about these last few years of obviously a bunch of litigation, a lot of regulatory change, and obviously you just mentioned a lot of regulatory scrutiny. Has their role evolved? If you think about an insurer 10 or 15 years ago and today, is their role different?
Interestingly, I would say the recognition of their role, there has been a deepening of understanding of it, but the heart of it has more or less stayed the same. And I can give you an example of this, which is the Insurance Contracts Act, for example. That's been around for 40 odd years, and it identifies the rights and obligations of the parties to an insurance contract. And Section 13 of the Act says that the parties have an obligation of utmost good faith. And what that means is, for an insurer, when they're engaging with a customer in the context of a policy, they should be having regard to their own legitimate interests, but also the interests of the insured. Now, that is typically different to what is an arm's length commercial transaction where, you take care of yourself, they take care of themselves, and everybody's okay. Whereas at the heart of insurance, there's always been this understanding of that, I suppose, disparity of power between the insurer and the customer. And therefore, there have been expectations placed in how an insurer is expected to engage with its customer in the context of the insurance product. And all the recent regulations do is just flesh that out a little bit more, that there is more practical guidance for the insurers on what I suppose, an age-old expectation was, and what the practical permutations of that expectation can be. And so, yes, there's an evolution and there is more stringent guidelines, but certainly the heart of it, for me, hasn't really changed.
Those core principles have been consistent.
Exactly.
It's just really like how do they provide more? Or it's interesting, isn't it? The intention is to provide more clarity, but what you hear is the change is hard to then keep up with, and so but you can't have one without the other. You have to have change to try and increase the clarity, and so both things have to be true at the same time. And when I'm sure you think about these insurers, I mean, you mentioned there around all the way from thinking about building a product through to building it, delivering it, purchase journey through to a claims journey, through to the claim itself. With all the ramp up of enforcement from ASIC, etc. Are there any? Have you got a view on what the biggest maybe risks or blind spots
Yes.
in different areas of the policy lifecycle that exist today?
Yeah. So the recent prosecutions, if you look at them, they look at what you would expect a regulator to look at, which is a claims outcomes and someone's unhappy about it, or a group of people are unhappy about it, and therefore there's scrutiny in that sense. But what you also see, perhaps in not on a greater scale, but an increasing scale, is that the scrutiny is in the context of engagement that the insurer has or has had well before even a claim is lodged. So some of the recent examples are the policy and the way that was written. The ASIC takes the view that that's not clear, that's not transparent, or even some of the mundane notices, critical notices that are supposed to be issued to keep your customers informed about material changes in their policy, they didn't go out, for example. And this is not necessarily a point of surprise for me. And the reason for that is the claims outcome and the unhappy claims outcome has been a point of conversation and deliberation and review for a very long time. If a customer is unhappy with a decision, they can have that reviewed either by AFCO or go to court about it. And therefore, a lot of guidance and a lot of, I suppose, analysis have sat around those aspects for quite some time. And so if I was to speak to insurers to say, if you want to check out where your blind spots are, then certainly have a look at the parts of your policy life cycle that perhaps haven't had a lot of airtime and perhaps feel mundane and general business as usual process, but you still have compliance metrics in that. And so you certainly want to be paying attention to, do I have enough monitoring to ensure that I will be alive to an issue as it comes up? And if that happens, do I have the systems in place to properly investigate it and deal with it? So that's where my hints would be if you want to look out for some blind spots.
Is there any specific prosecutions recently that have been really interesting ones that people might not know about that have been interesting to learn from?
Well, there are a lot of them. In fact, all of them, I would say. But we would be here all day. There are two that come to mind. One of the most recent ones, in fact, which was a decision that was published in October last year. I'm aware that ASIC is formulating an appeal to that decision, so we might not talk about that because whatever I say might change on the other side of it. But there's one that's actually a really good example, which kind of I suppose teases out what might be the usual issues that insurers should look out for. And this particular prosecution, the decision was published in May 2023, so it was recent-ish. And the context of this is that ASIC had undertaken an investigation of this insurer, and this insurer had quite appropriately cooperated with that investigation. On the back of that, things were brought to light when it was evident that things had fallen over for this insurer, and this insurer quite appropriately conceded the things that did fall over. And ultimately, ASIC and this insurer came to court together to say, look, there have been failures. Here's why these failures occurred, and penalties do follow. So this is what we propose to be the penalty. And the court was then tasked with assessing, given the circumstances, if the penalty is appropriate. And this example is a good example because it tends to deal with the acts that typically come up when you're looking at scrutinizing the conduct of insurers. And I'll give it to you just in case any of your listeners are interested. And if you are not, you can, doze off and come back at the end of it. So the first act is the Insurance Contracts Act. It's been around for a while, but what was relevant for this particular matter is, again, the duty of utmost good faith, which does require an insurer to have regard to the interests of its insured as well. The second act was the ASIC Act, and this has a lot of different guidance and prohibitions on insurers' conduct. And here the prohibitions that were relevant were in the context of misleading and deceptive conduct by the insurer, or alternatively representations that an insurer makes about the policy and the benefits the policy has. And if you fall foul of these provisions, penalties do follow, which obviously did in this instance. And the final act is the Corporations Act. And there were some recent changes in this where from 2022, the insurers are obliged to act towards their customer in the context of providing financial services in a manner that is honest and fair and efficient. And that's efficiency is one of those things that comes up here as well. So with all of that, let's jump in. There are multiple issues that came up here, but we'll talk about two.
Okay. Okay.
The first is in the context of claims. So there was a provision in the policy that said if you cooperate with the rehabilitation programs and satisfy us that you have, we will pay you an extra benefit. And sure enough, about 119 customers had appropriately complied, appropriately given the proof that they had complied, and by all accounts, including the insurers, these claims ought to have been accepted. But unfortunately, they were not accepted within a reasonable time. And ultimately, this insurer became aware of this issue by way of a complaint, no surprise there. And it took about 2.5 years from when the complaint was raised to when things were investigated, and ultimately remediation was provided by the insurer once they realized there was an issue. So when this came to court, well, the court said, just by reason of your failure to pay these benefits within your reasonable time, that is taken as a representation you have made to these 119 customers that benefit was not payable, and that was false in the circumstances. And because of that, this conduct is misleading, deceptive. You have made false representations. You do fall foul of the ASIC provisions. Therefore, penalties will follow. But of interest perhaps for the insurers is that the exposure for this insurer was to a tune of 100 million in penalty. But the court took into account the conduct of this insurer, including its cooperation with ASIC, but also the fact that it had in fact remediated the non-payments, albeit 2.5 years too late. And on that basis, the court accepted that the proposed penalty, which was proposed by this insurer and ASIC together, which was 10 million, was appropriate. So there was a substantive reduction given, I suppose, how the insurer ultimately dealt with the issues that it faced.
Acted, yeah.
Exactly. And but however, because of this misrepresentation, the insurer also fell foul of its duty of utmost good faith under the Insurance Contracts Act. And similarly, it also fell foul of the requirements under the Corporations Act to ensure that it was honest and fair and efficient. And here is where the learnings come from for us in the concessions that this insurer made to the court as to why this happened. And unfortunately, it did not have appropriate systems to monitor the claims outcomes. And similarly, it didn't have effective systems to ensure that the investigations of these complaints were done in a manner that was swift and within a reasonable time frame. So you can see where the focuses are. It's, yes, things can come up, but your systems can either help you or not help you. If you're going to be far too reactionary to these things, then trying to have things in place so that you can be as proactive as possible. So that was just one issue. Now, I don't have to go to the other issue, given how much airtime this one issue has taken up, but it's a matter for you, Nigel.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think the thing that really jumps out for me there is we spoke about innovation a little earlier.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just come to my mind now. Sometimes we don't think about innovation within what we've just spoken about,
Correct.
Which is monitoring, which is compliance, and you can apply technology not just to the product creation or like the selling of the policy, or the kind of acting on the claim and delivering a wonderful claims experience, but also how do you have internal technology that allows you to have the monitoring to make sure the systems are doing what they need to, the processes are there. It's something maybe I haven't thought about, but like just listen to what you just articulated there of how important that piece is within the insurer, and maybe at the moment it's just a person sat in a room and like moving paper around, and actually so therefore things do get missed. And so how can you kind of innovate in that area maybe?
Actually, what you say about internal use of technology, it actually was the other issue in this case.
Oh, was it? There you go.
So it's almost like you've read this, Nigel.
But me and my insurance case law, I'm definitely not up to speed.
You don't need me here. I was going to say it's worth probably noting. Yeah. So what happened in one of the other issues with this insurer was that it had adopted the system that had sent and was equipped to send mass scale of notices that There were critical
Okay.
notices on the policy life cycle.
Yeah.
And that particular technology had within it this capacity to place what was referred to as a suppression flag. And what that meant was that if it was applied, then notices didn't go out for a prescribed time or for an indefinite period.
Got it.
And where things unraveled for this insurer is that only some of its personnel were aware of the suppression flags or trained on the suppression flags, and the balance of the personnel either weren't aware of its existence or did not have the training. And the consequence of that was that over a span of 3 years, about 375 policies were affected where critical notices, including cancellation of policies, dishonor notices, didn't go out. And it affected about 1,000 customers. And unfortunately, again, the concessions made by the insurer in this, and this is where the learnings come from for us, is that they said, look, we didn't appropriately train our staff, and we didn't monitor whether these flags were being appropriately used. And those two pieces fell over. So, and again, it fell foul of the provisions of the Corporations Act. So it can be a double-edged sword in that, how we ultimately execute. It's not the fact that best intentions are not enough is the crux of it. We have to deliver what we want to deliver.
If you were put a young company's hat on here.
Yes.
I know there's a bunch of startups listen to the pod and will be listening to this with big ears thinking, wow, I've got a lot of things to worry about.
Yes.
How does, from a legal standpoint, size doesn't matter? You can be a 3-person company or a 10,000-person company. The legislation still applies. Have you got any advice to those startup founders out there that are trying to grow within the within financial services, specifically within insurance, maybe don't have the budgets that they maybe need to have to be not to be compliant, but to spend all of their time, energy, and resource on this area? Right. And so, is there any kind of maybe not cheat sheet, but anything they should? These are the things. If you're going to focus on a few areas, these are the things to be really thoughtful about.
Sure, I should say being smaller is actually gives them a better opportunity to be more agile. The challenge that the larger players have is that the effective communication, it's harder to maintain across your business the bigger and bigger you get. So you do need to get more intentional about that. Whereas a smaller team or smaller business, it's actually a lot more easier, I suppose, to keep that central heartbeat and the central focus in line and easier to deliver on that. So from a compliance perspective, I would say that get yourself trained. Get yourself trained on the really critical pieces, because if you are ultimately going to be, and this is the truth of it for founders, they're wearing many hats all at once, and they don't know what they don't know, and that's why they do need to close that gap, because you could inadvertently expose yourself, and so and the training actually can be quite robust. I'm aware of trainings that are provided for directors of certain entities that can be really robust and give you a good eagle-eye view of where perhaps your flags need to go up. That should be a point of concern for you. And that's really what you want. You want your instincts lined up with what needs to be achieved and where problems could come up. You just need to have that foresight. So if you have the appropriate training and comfort with that training, that would go a long way.
Perfect. Yeah, because it almost gets your gut feel ready as well.
Correct.
In terms of where should I look? What stones should I make sure I'm turning over to? The very important ones that expose the business and our customers to risk.
Correct.
Interesting. I did see, taking a really big jump left here,
Sure.
I saw something that I saw you when I was doing some research before the pod around major weather events.
Yes.
And so some sort of proactive planning and how insurers can adopt some mindset. Can you go into that? Because I read it a little bit. I didn't go too deep, but I thought it was really interesting. And I know there's a lot of now, being in Australia, lots of Nat Cat events, and therefore lots of businesses are affected by this a lot. So I thought it was just really interesting just to spend a couple of minutes on.
Sure, absolutely. So Australia has a lot of large scale events, and as a result, insurers thankfully are there to help customers who are faced with that. And in recent times, we've had, no surprise, more events, more weather-related events. And what these do is that they give the insurers some notice, not a lot, but some notice about oncoming onset of large volume of claims. And what I'm aware of are insurers who are proactively, prior to these events, coming up with solutions that are tailored to that specific event. And the solutions are really marked with that customer-centric focus and wanting to provide as swiftly as possible a solution for the customer that is going to have high impact and meet the needs that they have. And so I personally commend those efforts, because what you do see is, particularly when you do have a large volume of claims coming up, it's not just about the claim, it's about the vulnerability of the customers that need to be front and center, and customers are suffering from significant loss and damage. And so we certainly want to get it right in the best possible way. And it sets up a platform for us to showcase what we're supposed to be doing really well as well. So these sort of initiatives, to me at least, they help create that natural organic growth of industry practices that regulators want to see anyway. And they also have the capacity to not just assist the insurers in the commercial sense of increasing market growth and retention and customer trust, but it also has other positive impacts, including increasing the morale of their team and increasing that general momentum for customer-centric solutions. And the more that becomes a natural thing for insurers, the more likely that we're heading in the right direction of where we need to be anyway in light of recent regulatory change.
Yeah, I think sometimes having a delightful experience sometimes doesn't take much. It doesn't take sometimes delighting a customer in obviously a massive time of need, but maybe that time of need isn't quite there yet. But how do you communicate with your customers when you can see something going to happen, knowing that there's going to be a relationship that you're going to have with that customer on the claims side, almost a very high likelihood. How can you start that relationship just a little bit before, share some knowledge, share what might be happening, what might then be the process, some communication, transparency of what's going to happen after the event, and if you're affected. All of those kinds of things make a customer feel good.
Absolutely.
And often, I suppose, when I've been in situations, communication and transparency is so important. Often, it doesn't, even if it's not an insurance event, I'm rambling a little bit here, but even if it's not an insurance event and you're sat waiting for an aeroplane and you just sit in the waiting room and it's obviously delayed, but no one talks to you for an hour and a half.
Tells you why.
And everyone gets frustrated.
Yes.
But if the team come on and say, look, this is the problem, it is going to be an hour and a half, we'll keep you updated, and I don't know, bring you out a bottle of water to keep everyone. All of a sudden, it's just the outcome doesn't change, but the impact of the communication is massively different. So it's just really interesting listening to you say that about how important it is for the customers, how they're going to feel when you just communicate better and get ahead of the relationship.
Absolutely. And given recent times and changes, that is no longer just a nice to have, it's a must have.
Must have.
We are required to be transparent. We are required to be frank and plain in our communication, that the customers are appropriately informed and they know what to expect in the circumstances.
Yeah. Now we have lasted over half an hour and we have not touched on AI. We haven't touched on AI yet.
Oh, right.
How have we not done it?
How have we not done it?
I'm not sure.
We've been circling.
We've been circling around. I think now we're going to have to go straight in for it now.
Let's do it.
Let's jump in. So there's a lot to go in here. I think an AI I think it can be on two sides, which is one, the risks and like what we should be worried about.
Yes.
But I think there's another side I know you've touched on a little bit, which is actually you can have a really powerful positive impact on supporting compliance and improving customer outcomes. And maybe let's just start on that side. Let's start on the positive side of, I'd love to hear your thoughts around what you think maybe the biggest opportunities are for AI to create kind of value, but without creating a lot on the risk side.
Well, without creating a lot on the risk side is a tall order, given the evolution of AI. And that there's still learnings to be had in how AI is evolving, and in some sense, it's hard to predict how it's ultimately going to evolve as well. So for me, this is such a lawyer response, is start with a risk. Start with how comfortable you are with risk. Start with having a real frank conversation across your teams on your appetite for risk, on what risk or fear, what fears are keeping you up at night, and ensure that you have a really good understanding across the board as to what risks you are comfortable with and what risk mitigation factors and mechanisms you're wanting to deploy. So start there. But that being said, to answer your question, Nigel, certainly AI presents an excellent opportunity, and for me, I can readily see that opportunity, particularly in the analysis side of things, because AI has got this capacity to take in a large volume of information and data and then be able to make heads or tails of it and come up with patterns that it identifies, or alternatively solutions that it identifies, and so on. But given I suppose, the development of AI, and certainly if you are developing an AI for yourself, you certainly don't take it at face value, because it is also learning, and we all know how things can, unexpected outcomes can occur in those circumstances. But to me, where you perhaps want to focus on is start with what data you're going to provide the AI, because the quality of the data is going to determine the quality of how helpful or how indicative the outcomes proposed by the AI would be. And otherwise, I would also say, think about the parameters. If you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers. And again, this is the lawyer in me. Do not let go of the risks as they relate to protecting confidential information and being aware of your privacy regulations as well. And so you certainly want to make sure you stress test that whatever information your AI is processing, that there is no risk of breaches insofar as confidentiality or privacy that'll land you on the front page news the next day. So you certainly do want to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're already deep on this, but from a policy in terms of Australia standpoint around bringing the AI regulation in, I haven't gone really deep into it, but obviously trying to keep a little bit across it around what's the I suppose the national policy here in terms of AI. And I guess you can look at the US being pretty open and being kind of pro innovation and have at it, and we'll work about it afterwards. And then you have kind of the EU taking a much more risk-averse approach, maybe taking a sledgehammer to an egg kind of approach of like making sure something's like very, very tight and robust. Have you got a sense of where Australia is sitting from that regulatory landscape from on AI policy?
Well, when I think about that, I take my cues more so from what the courts are doing, which might start to give us, I suppose, a sense of at least what the adjudicators are leaning to.
Yep.
And what I'm aware of, particularly with some of the recent practice notes that have been issued by the courts in New South Wales, is that the courts are wanting to quarantine certain areas away from AI. And that is appropriately so, because you do want to ensure that ultimately what is being represented to the court is correct and not something that is clean and tailored and polished up by AI, but ultimately inconsistent with the truth of the matter. So the courts are very protective of that, and quite rightly so. And so there is I would say the sense that I'm getting is, it's not to say that AI will not be allowed to be explored, but certainly there is an appetite to put parameters of where you cannot perhaps engage with AI to protect the process appropriately. So there will be freedoms, but perhaps not unfettered freedoms, would be my sense.
Interesting. I'm trying to think of the name of the application. There's an AI legal app that is growing. Would you know the name of it? Do you use any AI in your workplace today?
Well, we develop our own, and they're continuing to develop. They're continuing to develop. So we're still in the exploratory phase as opposed to the implementation phase. So I can't speak to my personal experience using AI in legal sense. And also, again, the challenge with these aspects is that you do have to be mindful of the parameters that have been set, even more so for us as solicitors, given the guidance that we received from the courts.
Yeah, exactly. I think I saw really early on, I think it was only just after there was, it came out in the court that a lawyer had used and cited some case law that had just been
some phantom case law that didn't exist.
Some phantom case law that didn't exist.
Yes,
and
unfortunately. I will say this. This is just from personal experience. I have noticed an uptake of individuals who perhaps are not legally represented using ChatGPT to formulate solutions to correspondence that they receive from lawyers, and you can catch them coming a mile away. And it is a bit difficult because unfortunately they accept that what is being said by this AI is correct, and when you correct them, they tend to prefer what is being said by the AI.
Fair enough.
I'd rather solicitor. I understand that.
I'd rather the other version.
Correct.
I'd rather the other version. Thanks.
Correct. And so I could see some of the problem, perhaps, or challenges with this.
I'll tell you what, one area actually we've used it a little bit, and then maybe oversharing a little bit, but bear with me, is that we've sometimes used it to just not ChatGPT specifically, but any of the models to identify specifically actually on the commercial contract side, less on like how we deliver products, etc., but more just on the commercial agreements, is to understand a few areas to focus in on, and then being able to share that with our legal, who's absolutely fantastic, and to get a bit of an understanding, and from a non legal standpoint, but just understand how you can have a conversation with your legal representation that you understand things a little bit. Does that make sense in terms of some terms and some clauses that get put in to be able to get a bit of knowledge around that, not to try and do it on your own, but to try and educate yourself to have a better conversation with legal representation. I found it really useful.
Sure. I don't dissuade that at all, to the extent that you're exploring what would be random Latin terms that perhaps don't make any sense, which is understandable. So I take no issue with it. I would simply say this to anyone wanting to use this as a sort of starting platform, is just be prepared that might not be right, and that's okay. And perhaps if you're speaking to your own solicitors, tell them, hey, my friend ChatGPT helped me out with a summary.
Summary. So let me know what you actually think.
Correct. And so, because what the issue with any of these sort of forums is that you need to have provided all the critical information to have the correct answer. And generally, someone who's not a solicitor might not be aware of, oh, wait a minute, if I provide this one critical fact, it actually changes the outcome. And that's where things could go in places you never intended to. So you do want to, if you're going to use it, just be upfront with your solicitor and say, hey, I've been assisted by my assistant, but if there's something that you need from me, let me know. So just give them a heads up, is what I'd say.
Absolutely love it. I could talk all day, and that's a strange thing to say, to talk about insurance law, but I've really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed this so much, but I'm not going to let you go yet. I just want to talk about one last thing.
Sure.
I want to pull out the crystal ball. I'll look into the future.
Yes.
And as much as you can. And I'd love to maybe understand one piece of advice you might have to an insurer who's navigating this next wave of regulatory change. What would that piece of advice be, that one thing that someone can take away from here and go, that this is the single thing I should take away?
Sure. I would say do what you're doing. You have embraced the changes and the opportunities that the changes have presented, and you have seen for yourself the benefits that they have provided for your business and also for your customer engagement, really.
Yep.
And with the change, any change, including regulatory change, if you can adopt it with that growth mindset, there is that opportunity for greater gains to be made. And particularly with regulatory change, at the heart of it, it is to increase market trust in the insurance sector. And that to me is symbiotic with market growth. And though there will be growing pains if there is to be further regulatory change, it can certainly be honed in for the mutual benefit of both the insurer and the customer alike. So I would say don't be afraid of it, embrace it.
Absolutely love it. Look, Kezia, thank you so much today. It's been so great. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure everyone at home has gone away and learned a little bit too. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Nigel. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
So everybody, we're going to wrap up here. I hope you really enjoyed this as much as I did. If you do want to see our faces, you can jump over to YouTube and you'll be able to see the video version over there. And as always, if you want to hear more from industry leaders who are pushing the boundaries in insurance, please do check out our other episodes of our podcast series, Building Tomorrow's Insurer. But from Kezia, from me, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.